Welcome to Athlon U. My name is Braden Gall. Follow me on the internet at Braden Gall.
And I'm Stephen Lasson. You can also follow me on the internet over at athlonsports.com for all of your college football off-season, in-season reading, predictions, rankings. And you can also follow me on the internet at Athlon Stephen on Twitter. Also on Blue Sky, Stephen LCFB over on Facebook and Instagram.
You thought the coaching carousel was done. No. It is not finished. And man, is it a juicy story. Troy Taylor is out at Stanford. Andrew Luck is wielding a big stick and speaking softly. He's an interesting cat. We'll talk about that. And of course, what is the general manager's role supposed to be in college football? I want to ask you that, Stephen. We also have some questions, some preliminary questions. I'm going to whet the whistle, or the appetite, as it were, with an H, to our loyal listeners who care deeply about the Athlon Sports College Football Magazine, coming out in about 2 months ish, give or take, ballpark. I want to just dip the toe into some of the debates, some of the rankings decisions that I know you are going to agonize over the course of the next 8 weeks. So we're going to do that. And I got some questions about the process. Over the years, we've got expansion of the playoff, we've got portal, we got NIL, we got all these different things that have affected the way we, in a preseason way, analyze teams. So I thought, what a good time to talk about some of those issues that you've been dealing with over the last, how many years now at Athlon? Are we at 20 yet?
I think so. I think that's right. It's hard to believe.
When did you start fact checking? Like part-time,
Yeah, it's a good question. I probably should have this memorized by now, as much time as I've spent at Athlon Sports. But no, it actually is funny. As you say this, we were driving by our old office area downtown in Nashville a few weeks ago, and I just had thought about all that's changed since we had started the magazine process with you and I working there. So it's probably been about 20 years. I think that's fair.
I was hired in September of 07. August or September of 07, basically around the start of that football season, the craziest football season that we've ever had, really, in modern college football history. So we've had some really interesting stuff happen to the sport and to the magazine. So I thought I'd ask you a few questions, and then we'll talk about some of those debates that we're going to have over the course of the next few weeks. Again, just dip the toe. Just a little, an amuse-bouche, as it were.
Over the next few weeks, I'm already agonizing over what the heck to do with some of these G5 teams. So by all means, that anxiety keeps me up at night.
Well, let's turn it into content, Steve. All right. Speaking of anxiety, apparently everyone walking around in the halls of Stanford, everyone there didn't want to be there or be around Troy Taylor, apparently. So Troy Taylor, the head coach for the Stanford Cardinal, has been fired. Now, you and I have talked about Taylor a few times on the show, that they have overachieved in recruiting relative to the team's success, their location in the ACC, their kind of position in college athletics. They got a life raft, of course, from the ACC. They take it. And Taylor has been largely much better at recruiting than any head coach at Stanford should be, based on the wins and losses and the quality of the program the last few years. So that's sort of the background on the football. And what's interesting is, so Andrew Luck has decided, the general manager, not the athletic director at Stanford, has decided to fire Troy Taylor. He put out a statement on Twitter. I believe it was it Tuesday? I believe it was Tuesday.
Yes.
Big story in ESPN documenting this investigation, or multiple investigations, that took place at Stanford. So Troy Taylor, what date? Do you have the date that Troy Taylor was hired? Let's kind of roll through the timeline here. Do you have the actual date? Was it spring of 23? Is that correct?
December of 2022.
Okay, so let's keep this in mind. Troy Taylor is hired as a head football coach in December of 2022, around the same time that normal coaches are hired in a normal hiring process, right?
It appears that he had some sort of press ability on December 12th, 2022, saying there is no other place I'd rather be, talking about Stanford.
Well, just treat people like that then. So apparently in the spring of 23, so within months of getting the job, there are allegations and reports of sort of just, I'm just going to call everything he's done here general misconduct, just some douchery. Can we call it that? Is that a good adjective for you, Stephen?
Yes, I would sign on to that. I think if you are, as the ESPN story being I think the direct quote was, an equal opportunity a-hole, I think that's a fair way to sum it up.
There's all kinds of, I don't want to get into the specifics of the language here because, defamation is real hot these days. I don't want to get into the specifics of the language, but basically just treating people poorly, including women, especially women, inappropriately. And again, I'm not going to get into all the details. You want to go read it, go read it. But basically, again, this is a lot of douchery here by the head coach at Stanford. Apparently, from the day he got the job, because he gets the job in December, late December, and by spring, Stanford has hired a consulting and mediation firm to investigate within months of hiring this guy, which to me is, I mean, I'm sorry. I feel terrible for the people inside the athletic department, but that is funny, Steven. That's funny.
Yeah, it didn't take long, right? That's the story here is, when Troy Taylor was hired, I think you and I both agreed this was a pretty solid hire. I mean, Stanford, if you think about how Stanford's recent coaching history has gone, you had Jim Harbaugh, who was hired from San Diego, obviously really good hire at the time. It worked out great. They promoted David Shaw, continuity from the Harbaugh era, worked out pretty well, except for the end. And Taylor came from Sacramento State, where they were 30-8 and made the FCS playoffs in all 3 of his years in charge. So from
three playoff bids, 3 investigations, or
yes, almost, yeah, fair. But I mean, on paper, this looked like a really good hire for Stanford. But to your point, it did not take long. If you go to draw the timeline, December 22 to the spring, there was an immediate issue here with his hire at Stanford. So, yeah.
So let's go back to the timeline here. So there's a whole investigation all of 23 season. Stanford, not good at football. Good at recruiting, not good at football. There's an entire investigation that concludes at the end of that season, or roughly around the end of that season. Taylor signs a letter on February 14th, 2024. So at the end of his first season, going into his second season, he signs a letter acknowledging that he could be fired if the conduct continued, according to the documents. This is all in the ESPN story. So, okay, again, hired December 22. Already lots of douchery by the spring of 23. Investigation conducts by third-party outside entity to do the investigation. Signs a letter in February of 24. Hey, I can get fired if I keep doing all this nonsense. By July, like 5 months later, a second investigation is being conducted on Troy Taylor. And I'm only laughing because it's ridiculous. It's ridiculous. You are a grown adult man, and if you have been told not to, certainly you should know not to behave a certain way anyway, but like if you've been, what are we doing? Like, stop acting like a equal opportunity a-hole, as the quote says. So then he says, hey, I'm willing. I'm complied with all these investigations. I've accepted all the recommendations, blah, 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 blah. This is where it gets interesting to me. This is where it gets more juicy, because all this so far is just standard operating, like old school football coach likes yelling at people and being rude to women. Like, so far, it's standard. It's awful, but it's standard. So the university gets all kinds of complaints. The third party investigates the matter. The summer they go through this whole thing. So Andrew Luck is hired in November of 24. Keep in mind the timeline here. Athletic director Bernard Muir announced his intentions to resign after the academic year. He declined to comment on the story, which was, I guess, that was probably in the early fall of 24, roughly speaking. Matt Doyle, the senior associate athletic director, also received warnings after the first investigation, so he's on that side of this equation. So the athletic director is resigning. The associate athletic director is implicated. The head coach has been investigated twice, and you have a new general manager who's like the patron saint of Jim Harbaugh's resurrection program for Stanford, taking over this general manager's job in November. Fast forward, mid-March, late March, Troy Taylor's out. Do you want to highlight another nugget in there somewhere about Nevada?
Yeah, as let me make sure I have the exact quote on this one. But I will say,
life is stranger than fiction, my guy.
I thought once that story came out last week that I would have been very surprised had he survived another season there. Like, it would have taken a pretty special season probably for Troy Taylor to keep his job. I think so. Not totally, uh, I guess surprising. I guess the more surprising thing is that it came now and not right after that story broke. But that I can't find the direct quote in this one, but there was a nugget uh, from the Mountain West Nevada story. It basically said they interviewed Troy Taylor with Ken Wilson, and that Troy Taylor was just kind of, according to the Twitter post, it was kind of a weird guy. So, um, yeah, I mean, I think you could go through the whole list here. I
Weird
mean,
guy.
culture, we talk about that a lot. Building a winning culture. How do you do that when you can't treat your staffers well? How does that that impacts your entire program? Also, ridiculous that he was warned about it and continued to do this a second time, especially when you're someone like Troy Taylor, who worked like crazy probably to be an offensive coordinator and an FCS head coach to get a power conference opportunity. So a very strange situation. And also, I guess, as we see this all the time in college football, there's always one surprise in the carousel that you don't expect, right?
Yeah, no question. And we'll get to some of those surprises that affected us in magazine time as well. By the way, make sure you tune on the YouTube notifications, subscribe. You can watch the show there. You can watch the laughing that I'm doing while Steven's talking about all this stuff. So what's interesting to me, and this is kind of a conversation, Steven, that we are having in the workplace writ large in this country, which is like, where's the line, and every coworker you have in each different job has a different set of standards and a different set of rules, and they accept certain levels of this kind of joking or that kind of joking or that kind of seriousness. Everybody's different and everybody has a different line. And I realize that it has been an adjustment, mostly for men, to sort of understand where those lines are for people in professional settings. It should not be that difficult to just be classy and professional at all times. But I get it. Football, bunch of testosterone bros, like in the weight room. Like, I get it. It can be difficult. It can be different. I have a lot of grace for anyone making a single mistake in this area, right? Like,
Right.
I work with plenty of women in my career where we've all been sitting around, joking around, having a good time, and it goes to a certain place, and they're totally fine with those jokes. Like, it's, I think that's normal. When you go a little too far, and that person says, either in formal way or an informal way, says, "Whoa, whoa, whoa, hold up, that's not cool." That's all you should need. Like, that's all you should need. You want to tell nasty jokes? Go do it with your buddies. You want to yell at people? Go do it to your kids. God bless them. But like, in a professional setting, even in a football setting, one mistake, not a big deal. I think we all need more grace with each other to say that he didn't mean that or she didn't mean that. It was a little mistake, whatever. When you are told by an external investigation that this is conduct that was not acceptable and that people are uncomfortable and unhappy and are, whatever because of this, a real human being makes an adjustment there. That's all. And that's kind of why I find it funny, is this is a like 60-year-old dude who's just like refusing to adjust his behavior after being told, like, come on, dude, cut it out.
Right. That's exactly kind of what I was getting at, is that if I had worked my entire career to be a power conference head coach and at a pretty prestigious institution like Stanford, I think if I was warned about my behavior after the first spring, I think I would have quickly changed things so that way I could keep my multi-million-dollar contract and my job. And instead of being an unemployed football coach that I don't, we'll see what happens with the buyout and all that. But no, I mean, he was warned. They did one investigation and the second one, and does not appear that a dang thing changed. And so that's why he's out of a job. And that's why Andrew Luck has a very difficult task ahead.
Well, I want to ask you about that, but just like now I'm thinking, because I wrote down a bunch of questions for you about the history of Athlon. And one of the things that strikes me talking about this Taylor situation is that like my wife's office at a corporate America job is very different culturally than my job at Rivals or my job at Athlon or my job at my local station here in Nashville. And there's sort of each one has its own standard sort of what's acceptable and what's not, and sort of where the lines are. And I get all of that. But we definitely had a guy who hired the two of us at Athlon. He hasn't been at the company for 15 years, been a long time, but he hired both of us. That guy's jokes would not play today.
Yeah. 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 That's a
totally. Yeah. I mean, good guy, good father, good husband, like good guy. But like the type of jokes he would make with us in our little news pit we had back in the day, they would not work today. You got to adapt. You got to evolve, man. It's 2025. Come on, Troy.
I mean, what
And
do
I
you?
don't even know. And to be fair, I have no idea if what he's doing is like way, way worse and over the top than this. I'm just sort of speaking generally to an issue about respect of other people in our workplace, right?
Right. I mean, 100%. And as we've pointed out, I think if you are warned about it one time
Yeah.
and you have to go through an investigation and you know those kind of comments or what jokes or whatever they are
Yeah.
not
Yeah.
but also it's not just like one person saying this is quite a few people that was
20
yeah
people.
yeah interviewed, so it's not, and I'm gonna
Right.
guess there probably is more than just 20.
Yeah.
And if you're an equal opportunity a-hole, as the story said, I mean, I think he
Yeah.
got a fair shake there at Stanford. It's not like he was given plenty of opportunities to change things.
Yeah. Yeah. And again, the reason I bring all of that up and go down that path, Stephen, is that I do want to acknowledge that it can be difficult at times to know where lines are. I just want to acknowledge that that's a thing we're kind of all working towards, or at least we did over the last 15 years,
Mhm.
and that's not what this is, right? That this is, 7 level 3 violations and 20 different people and 3 investigations, and and so what I find interesting is let's go to Andrew Luck part of this. So Andrew Luck gets the job in November of this past year. I assume he doesn't know, or maybe gets inklings or rumblings that the investigations have taken place. A rational thing to do would be for him to say, when he gets the job, to say, I'm going to research this on my own and come up with my own opinion. That probably takes some time because you don't want to just go based on what people tell you, right? You're in charge now. You're the GM. You got to make sure you're doing everything right. The fact that he interviews, does that tip this a little bit, or what do you think? Does that pushes it over? Because the timing is a little interesting here to wait 5 months after getting the job to make this move.
It is, I think, to take a step back for a second, it's worth noting in the Athletic story, they said a source had indicated that Andrew Luck knew some of the details of Taylor's situation before accepting the job and was briefed on it, I guess, after starting.
Makes sense.
So I guess he probably knew what he was walking into, but and this also gets a kind of what we were talking about at the beginning. I mean, Stanford has been in a really unique spot I mean, as a job, they're very unique. Also, with the Pac-12 going away, moving to the ACC, there was a lot of roster turnover. I think if you just didn't know anything about what was going on, you would say Troy Taylor had a massive sort of rebuilding effort or reloading effort at Stanford. So it was going to take some time. So if I was Andrew Luck walking in knowing this, I would want to also gauge the on field and also the knowing that there's a second investigation. So you knew all these factors in there. And so I think at some point it's just how do you come back from that, knowing that this is very public, knowing you have a coach who's
Right.
won six games in 2 years, and it doesn't feel like they're getting much better. It kind of made for an obvious, easy decision, I think.
Again, I think there's a grace period for Andrew Luck to kind of conduct his own personal
Yes.
investigation once getting on the job, regardless of how much he did or didn't know. He's going to want to do his own digging, interviews, questions, and come up with his own opinion. Okay, fine. Like that could take a couple weeks, a month, maybe 2. It doesn't take 5. It doesn't take 5 months to decide that this is not the right guy for the job. So I'm curious why they waited till now. I know that there's, recruiting periods and he's good at recruiting. So I don't know. I think that part's interesting.
Do you think it's because that investigation became public at ESPN by ESPN in the story?
That's my thought.
That's my thought too.
Is that they got forced by, daylight is the best disinfectant,
Right.
that kind of thing. I know not everybody in our country thinks that, but I just, that's and if that's the case, then that's kind of soft on his part, don't you think?
Yeah, I mean,
have some conviction and stand up for what you believe in, whether the public knows about it or not.
I guess if ESPN dropping that story made Stanford fire Troy Taylor, I'd be a little bit disappointed, probably in Andrew Luck.
Yeah.
Because it feels like if you came in and you knew there were problems, and as you appropriately pointed out, you deserve time to evaluate a coach and a program. And then you saw the on field product this year. And then you knew about the second investigation, which you were probably very well steeped in. And then you waited until March 25th to pull the plug. I think I'd be a little bit disappointed if the ESPN investigation forced their hand on that one.
Yeah, I agree. Then there's a follow-up question to all of this. I mean, I guess who are the candidates for the Stanford job? I'll ask you that in just a second. But I am fascinated by the role of the general manager. I think it is unequivocally an important role moving forward. I think it is absolutely something every major institution has to have. It is going to be a 7-figure job for every major institution, if not already for most. You got the Senior Bowl director, Jim Nagy, taking the Oklahoma gig. You know, Vanderbilt was one of the first to do this. Alabama's AD is a $1 million job. These are critical roles. But my question for you is, much in the way that Andrew Luck made the decision as a GM, not the athletic director, to fire the coach. Now, some of this is that the athletic director situation at Stanford is in flux. But what happens if Brent Venables at Oklahoma has a really bad season? And that's 3 bad seasons out of 4, one good one in the middle there. Is it the athletic director's job to fire the entire football staff and the general manager? Is it the general manager's role, like in the NFL and the other professional sports, where the GM makes these decisions? What are we doing here? I would like to see a little bit more clear line of delineation from a power structure standpoint. I'm assuming that is very clear inside the walls of most programs. But I would want my general manager to be focused exclusively on general managing, like the roster, because the roster is the thing that takes all your time and energy right now in college football, not coaching staffs and buyouts. And, let the athletic director handle that. That's his job. I don't know. Where are you at on what the role of GM should be?
Is it too simple or too complex to say that it might vary from program to program in what the role of the general manager, how much power they have?
I mean, I assume it does. I'm asking you what you
Yeah.
think it should be.
Well, here's why I bring that up is I was looking back at the release for Andrew Luck being hired at Stanford. And in there, it includes Luck will be tasked with overseeing the Cardinal football program, including working with Coach Taylor on recruiting and roster management, and with athletics and university leadership on fundraising, alumni relations, sponsorships, student athlete support, and stadium experience, which is pretty wide. So I guess if I was hiring a head coach and a general manager, I would not want my general manager to be firing my head coach. I would want that to be the job of the athletic director. I think you'd want your
Agreed.
general manager to be sort of in tandem with your head coach. You know their roster vision, you know what they're looking for in transfers, high school prospects, and let them do that. Let them manage the NIL. You worry about the X's and O's and the day-to-day operations of the program, getting ready for the season, in season, week to week. So it's a little different than the NFL, which the general manager holding most of the power when it comes to firing head coaches. I would prefer, if I was an AD, to hold that power while the head coach hires someone they can work with in the general manager role.
Is Michael Lombardi getting $1.5 million at North Carolina?
I believe that is right. Yes,
But there's no way he can fire Bill Belichick. Not that Bill Belichick will retire in the next 24 to 36 months to pass on to his nepo babies the entire North Carolina program. But
we need to have a conversation about this North Carolina coaching staff at some point, because I'm going to tell you, I'm pretty underwhelmed by it. And to your point, it is a lot of family business going on there.
1.1 million for Geoff Collins.
Well, also, I think Lombardi's son is also on staff. There's like
nepo babies.
There's like 100 Belichicks on that staff. So
I'm just saying the GM at 1.5 million. There's no way Belichick is like saying, okay, yeah, you can pay him 1.5, but he has the power to fire me. Like, there's no way.
Right. And also, don't forget to loop his girlfriend in on all matters about the football.
Stop. Low hanging fruit.
That was
just dangling there.
That was a rather humorous email to see someone unearth about Bill Belichick asking that matters of the football program, please loop his girlfriend in.
Oh my God. North Carolina, here's what's going to happen. North Carolina's going to be really good at football. this year and next year, and then Belichick's going to leave and retire and actually go do what he wants to do somewhere else, and like it's just we're going to have story after story after story of the absurdity of what was going on behind the scenes. That's what's going to happen.
Yeah, we'll talk more about North Carolina later this offseason, but I will I could see a short-term bump, but it's a wise
Yeah.
investment, obviously, to get maybe the NFL's greatest coach.
Well, and honestly, I think he makes a bigger impact on these players because it's the quality of the coaching. But really, the biggest deal, and this is how coaches are making decisions, which is going to lead us right into who would take the Stanford job, which is the biggest value play here for North Carolina is the outward perception that they're upping their game financially. That they're going to spend 9 or 10 million on the coaches. That they're going to spend, I think they have to have what, like 13 million in NIL money by like next year, something like that. That is the thing that will attract a coach more than Bill Belichick or winning. It's they have financial infrastructure that can pay players.
Yeah, no,
That's where we're at.
Yeah, I mean, I think if you want to take like I'm using North Carolina as an example, if you wanted to think long term that North Carolina investing equals other things down the road when we talk about like breakaway and conference realignment and all that. So that's also what I find interesting about Stanford is I think the next coach there, certainly knowing that Andrew Luck probably has pretty good job security, is probably going to have to give this next coach some time. There's certainly, while it is a harder job, there's also a lot of cash at Stanford. So I will be interested to see from a roster management. They've brought in some transfers, but they're not like ultra active in the portal. So it's an interesting situation for the next head coach there at Stanford.
Give me the James Blanchard story. The Texas Tech athletic or the Texas Tech general manager. What was the Notre Dame, the money? Give everybody a recap of that story.
Oh, so James Blanchard is Texas Tech's general manager and was one of, if not the first hire by Joey McGuire at Texas Tech when he was hired there. But he was pursued this offseason by Notre Dame to be their next general manager because their general manager left to go to USC. So we are in this era where general managers, the value of them is significantly increased, but he apparently received a 3-year deal around a total value of about 1.5, 1.6 million. So, and I mean,
so
that
$550,000, $600,000 a year ballpark.
yeah. And that's a raise from, I think he was making about 400,000 so yeah, I mean, these general managers, you mentioned the Lombardi salary, but a lot of these guys are starting to get over 500, 600,000 if you're a top-notch GM.
It's one of the most important jobs in the facility now, but I don't think it makes sense to have that person over the top of the coach. Now, in this case for Stanford, again, athletic director leaving, resigning, that's part of this. Andrew Luck, sort of Andrew Luck is a rare commodity also, right? Like the premier player of a generation whose father was also an extremely successful administrator, has a very good resource to lean on. Oliver Luck, of course, the athletic director of West Virginia. And wasn't he the president of the NCAA? So, I mean, you got a lot of administrative experience in a very smart brain in a body that was extremely successful and has a big profile. I think people are going to trust him to make the decisions here. Again, the timing of the story and the firing a little weird, but he's only been on the job for a few months. Who are his top candidates? Who is attractive and attracted to the Stanford job?
This is a really difficult question because I thought about this right after when I saw the news about Troy Taylor being fired, and I asked myself, is it worth it to do a coaching search right now, or do you just play 2025 with an interim? We have seen, teams have hired coaches late in the process, and they've been fine, like Kansas getting Lance Leipold a few years ago, kind of late in the process. So the first name that kind of went to my mind was Jeff Monken at Army, just because I think he's one at a hard place like Army. You have challenges in managing the roster. So could he be a candidate? His name's
recruits
been mentioned.
recruits nationally,
Right? Very national recruiter. So his name came up kind of first in mind for me. Also, Tavita Pritchard. He's the quarterbacks coach of the Washington Commanders. Former Stanford quarterback.
He was the quarterback when they beat USC when they were like a 41-point underdog, right?
That's right. That's a good call. So he did coach at Stanford until 2022 and under David Shaw. So he's a name that comes to mind. I thought about someone like Troy Calhoun just because same kind of situation as Jeff Monken. That seems like a long shot. I don't know, someone like Garrett Riley, like background in offense, maybe that'd be fun. Kind of going the same route as Troy Taylor's. You're hiring an offensive coach.
That's a long flight.
Yeah, so there's not an obvious glaring fit other than maybe like a Tavita Pritchard because he's in the NFL and former player, obviously.
I saw some Stanford fans like Chip Kelly, and I was like, guys, he was the head coach at UCLA and was like, nah, I'm good.
Yeah, UCLA was ready to fire him, and he was also ready to find the exits too. So
I know,
yeah,
but
right.
like he's been the head coach at a better school in California in a better conference. He was the offensive coordinator at Ohio State and thought, nah, I'm good. There's no way he's interested in the Stanford head coaching job. It's ridiculous.
Do you have any names that come to mind? I have one more I would throw out there, but
I just want Chris Peterson back in college football.
Yeah. I think
How old is he? He's not very old.
No, he's not very old at all. I don't know if we can get him away from the Fox set though. He seems to be pretty content as a analyst during the week. Chris Peterson. Well, Chris Peterson is 60, so
there's the problem is that the normal candidates that I might think would be better, that would be interested in good. And I don't want to say like that normally a coach from Minnesota, like PJ Fleck, would automatically look at Stanford as better. I don't know if he would, but that's just not the case anymore because of the Big Ten and the ACC. Like the value of the Big Ten contract versus the ACC is just not there. I'm curious if you were a coach at like Big 12, middle of the pack Big 12 school,
like a Dave Aranda, perhaps. Knowing you're from California. That sounds like a yes.
I didn't say yes. I just made weird noises.
The rumor mill's already chirping to Braden about potential candidates, obviously. So
those are inappropriate noises. I'm not supposed to make those in the workplace, so I could be fired for that. There's going to be an investigation.
I was also going to mention, I don't think they would go this route, but what about Ken Niumatalolo?
That's the name that makes sense. Like those kind of names.
Yeah. You mentioned it with Jeff Monken, national recruiter at Navy. I also think he's done a good job of adapting at San Jose State. They run the best offensive name in college football. They run the spread and shred, which is the greatest offensive name.
I got it. Go full Jake Dickard and hire an interim for this year. Dan Mullen next year.
I like that idea.
He's going to cook on offense. They have they're not going to invest in him the way he wants because they can't, because he's got all the money. He's making all the money that they have. And he just bounces to a bigger school in the ACC, a school that's known for quarterbacks and receivers and tight ends and running backs. They like running that big physical power offense that he wants to run anyway. Let's go. What do you think?
I love the idea. I think Dan Mullen's going to win a lot of games at UNLV.
No, he won't, because he'll be out at the end of the year on his own. He's going to go somewhere and get a job.
They wait till they cash those checks from the buyout from those teams leaving for the Pac-12. They will be
okay
if it works out. They will be dealing with a lot of cash at UNLV, which they also just hired Josh Pastner, which is a very fascinating coaching combo there.
This has been more Stanford talk in one episode than I think we've done like combined the last 2 years. So Stanford, if nothing else, you are interesting again with what happened this week. Fascinating stuff.
It's funny. It's funny because right before we started the show, Braden was like, "It's been a slow news week in college football," and then I'm like, "No, Troy Taylor just got fired." So
let's go. All right, some questions for you about the magazine and about rankings. And I know we're still a few weeks off from actually getting into the nitty gritty about this, but I'm curious, how much, do your rankings from January? Let's say January 1st, just because of it's an easy date to remember. You put out sort of the early lists, right around the national championship game. But let's call it January 1. You've got rankings in your head. that you're about to publish in the middle of January, 2025 list versus, let's say, 2010, maybe 2014, because that was the first year of the playoff. How much did those rankings change in your mind in the first years of doing this and that era, right? We just kind of joked about it. 07 to 2012 was like the first chunk of time that you and I were working there. How much did rankings change then versus how much do they change now in 2025?
I think they change a lot more from January until the final version in the magazine. It feels like we know less about these teams than ever before. So the first version in January is about 15% of your research. I don't want to get locked into something in January. I want to leave myself plenty of room to grow or understand some of these teams. So it's not only a personal sort of way I do things, but also I think just the rosters. I mean, I'm still waiting on like 12 teams to update their roster, but we're learning more about these teams because of the portal. There's so much more portal movement. We're trying to figure out how these teams are changing and adapting for this year. Whereas 5, 6, 7 years ago, I think we knew pretty much once you got past the national championship game, these guys were seniors. They're leaving. They have maybe one or two transfers coming in. Things were much more set. Things are much more fluid now, if that makes sense.
So you said 15%
Roughly.
yeah, we're just we're ballparking here. What percentage of the research do you think was done in 2010 at that same time in January? Because I know you used to get started on like depth charts and returning starters like in December, stats, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah. I
So
don't know, maybe like 40 to 50%.
okay.
I mean, does that make any sense at all?
Yeah, and I was actually
Yeah.
trying to go back and look at last year's top 25 that you put out in January and compare it to the magazine. Because I don't think I don't feel like you changed a lot of the rankings, but I remember, and this is one of the anecdotes that I remember talking to a coach and a couple of media folks 2 years ago at SEC Media Days. And I remember people saying, like both media and coaches, we know less about these teams at this time of year than we ever have before. And that's, of course, mid-July. I don't know why that wouldn't also apply to May when the magazine goes to print, or April when we have to have the rankings done, or January when we first start looking at this stuff. I mean, you and I have talked a lot over the last few weeks about the rankings have to sort of look like at the end of last season, but we have no clue what these teams are going to look like. That wasn't the case in 2009, 10, 11, 12.
Yeah, and this also gets at something I've been wrestling with on one of those late night MAC, Sunbelt, Conference USA anxiety-filled nights, which is
You're down a rabbit hole on that one.
right. Hopefully the algorithm serves me something good here. Is it worth being more, I guess, aggressive, different on predictions? Like I hate doing something different just for the sake of doing something different. I think that's always like a bad way to operate.
What do you mean different?
But I mean, like last year with Indiana, you and I talked about Indiana the offseason. We love their schedule. We love Signetti. We the Curtis Rourke coming in, and we ended up having them too low. And I got to thinking about this: is in this era of the portal, should we take a chance on some of these teams, like where we like the head coach and we like their portal? Maybe we bump, like you give them like a spot or two bump or more, because I would be really surprised, and we have to get another year or two of data on this. When it comes to the playoff, what is the percentage going to be of teams that were in it one year to the next? How many teams are making it back to back? How much change is there from year to year? So when I say being more aggressive, I say, is it worth taking a bigger swing on guessing how far the improvement is going to be for some of these teams, given that when you go through the Sun Belt is a great example of this, because I just finished some of the returning starters. I mean, like Georgia Southern has 10, App State has 7 returning starters. All of these teams in some of these smaller conferences are down on as far as returning production. So I think the swings between some of these teams in every conference could be significantly wider, if that makes sense.
Our Final Four last year: Georgia, Oregon, Texas, Ohio State. That's 3 out of 4. You got right. First of all,
Not bad.
great job. Let's see here. You have Liberty. We had Liberty in there.
Yeah.
And we had Florida State as the champion. Whoa, Florida
That was
State.
bad. I should have listened to you because you liked a different team other than Florida State.
I did. Utah is also in here, so I'm trying to count what we got. Penn State right. We got Notre Dame right. We missed Alabama, Michigan, Liberty, Ole Miss. That's 4. Utah, Florida State. That's 6. That's 6 out of 12. And I think I remember us doing a big episode where I said, "Look, half of these are going to be wrong. Who are they? Who are they?" And I just I'm trying to figure out, I know that our job in the magazine is to try to be as accurate as possible. And I think in 2009, 10, 11, and we can go back and tell some stories about this, because I think there was one year where you and I were like, no, we're not picking LSU. Like, you and I were the two voices in the meeting. I remember us picking Florida in 08 when no one else was picking Florida to win the national championship. We picked Florida number 1 in the nation in 08, and everyone else had, I think it was a bunch of other stuff, a bunch of other teams, USC's or whatever. And so there's been, I think we, and those meetings, like, Steven, you tell me if I'm wrong on this, but weren't you pretty convicted about those teams that you really liked at the top pretty early in the process?
Yeah, I would say it was much easier to have a strong conviction about those teams going into a prediction meeting at Athlon Sports back in, 2010, 11, 12. I think I feel less convicted about some of these predictions now just because of all the roster, changes and how fluid it is. Yeah.
But to your point about, I don't think it's right to think, and this is what makes this job hard, honestly. I don't think it's right to sort of just automatically bump a team up because of it being a portal guess, if that makes sense. I think the Indiana guess last year was less of a guess and more of a, we think the environment is set up well for this team to succeed. We like this about the team, the new head coach. Google him, he wins. We like this about the quarterback, very talented kid coming back and playing in Indiana. Love the schedule, sets up well. I think we had a conversation around Missouri last year where we were like, I don't think they're going to be very good, but they're going to win a lot of games. Turns out that was kind of what happened with Missouri. And so I think that there's, like, predicting Boise State and Ashton Genty being great and being the team in, that wasn't that complicated. That wasn't difficult to see. I think you have to have reasons to find a team. I really liked Iowa State last year. Really liked them. And I had reasons for that. And the reasons were, I like the quarterback, I like the culture, I like the staff, I like the weapons around the quarterback, I like how the way the defense is stability there, and the schedule sets up nicely. Boom, they did it. We missed on a lot of teams too, obviously. Florida State, for crying out loud. Like, oh my God. I don't know if there's ever been a team that, honestly, Steven, that was higher ranked in our magazine that finished worse than Florida State last year.
Yeah, that, I think when you finish in the 100s in our final 134, that probably wins the award. I mean, in a moment of just true honesty, as much as we want to get every prediction right in the magazine, it is impossible. I mean, it's not like we turn over every stone, we go through every stat, we go through all this stuff. I mean, you and I we get together every week and we talk about it on here, we talk about it elsewhere. I read every freaking story I can about every practice report. I was just reading some stuff on was it Southern Miss a few hours ago today. So, I mean, it's really hard, and it's also harder in this era of all these roster changes. And we have 29 coach changes this year, and we had over 20 last year. So how do you make sense of all that? I think it's much harder than it was before.
And if you look at the best teams in the country last year, let's say at the end of the year, I'm not doing this in any particular order, but let's say Ohio State's clearly the best. You got Notre Dame, Georgia, Texas, right? Probably the next 3. You got Penn State in there. I'm sure I'm missing somebody, but let's just say those are the 5 or 6, right? That are the top teams. The reason I am more inclined to pick Texas and Penn State, some of that is based on like logic, and like we talked about, there's reasons we liked Indiana, there's reasons to like Penn State and Texas. But it's also because I think, to your point, I think leaning in slightly in our rankings to something different, it's not the way. And first of all, none of these guys are Nick Saban. That's another angle to all
Yeah.
of this. Nick Saban was one of the only guys that could do this, which is reload, win a championship, new quarterback, transfer quarterback, freshman quarterback, running quarterback, passing quarterback. Didn't matter. I was going to win a championship. Kirby's probably the closest thing to that, but he has shown that he's not Nick Saban. I am like, my instincts tell me Texas and Penn State, because it's like the system we have built for our sport in a good way is designed to create a little bit more churn at the top. And that is generally a good thing, especially now that Saban's gone. I mean, he's alive. He's still with us. You know what I mean?
Right.
But if you look at those teams I just rattled off, I mean, how do we know how good? I mean, Georgia, great athletes. Alabama, great athletes. Oregon, great athletes. We just talked last week about how much they've sort of grown, right? Ohio State, great athletes. Michigan, great athletes. Like, you can look at the top 10, and there's all reasons why they could be good again this year. But they're all so different than they were last year. Again, Penn State and Texas feel the most like themselves, if that makes sense. And even then, Abdul Carter, the entire offensive line for Texas, all these guys are going to get drafted off both those teams.
Feels like banking on talent is always like an easy thing to do, especially like with Georgia. Given even Ohio State, Georgia, even with the roster turnover, it would be pretty surprising to me to see both outside the playoff next year. So, yeah, I go back to something I said a little bit ago, which is I'm going to need another year or two of the playoff to really get some good data on retention in the playoff, return to the playoff, how many new teams are making it year over year. When I think about being a little bit different or more aggressive with predictions, I think what I kind of was thinking is, if I think these teams are all in the same tier and the schedules are about even, maybe you lean a little bit more on this coaching staff because you trust them more, as opposed to,
Yeah.
I mean, if they feel even if it is a first year transfer driven decision, I think choosing the coach you like, or perhaps banking on a little bit of upside, is probably not the worst thing to do.
I think, to your point, in the earlier years of being at Athlon, again, that 07 to 2012 range, let's call it, and I was guilty of this on the pod in my career on Sirius XM. Anytime I would do on air, I would I would argue with folks and sort of lean with folks on, like, talent still is the number one most important factor. He who has the players wins the championships. Doesn't mean you're going to be a great team, but you can't be a great team without great players. The problem is, I think now, to your point, and this is not trying to be argumentative with you, but I think it's a good conversation. I don't know if it matters how many teams make the playoff in any given year. It's not like the NFL, where Josh Allen is still in Buffalo and Mahomes is still in Kansas City and Rodgers was still in Green Bay and, Daniels is going to be in Washington forever. Like, it's almost an entirely new, clean slate every year. And I think that makes the game fun. It makes our job in the magazine business very difficult.
Yeah, I think when I mentioned the playoff thing, what interests me is it's more of a point of like personal intrigue to understand what the year to year turnover is going to be, just out of curiosity, because if we're getting 7 new teams on a consistent basis in the playoff, I think that tells us something. I think that number will probably be a little bit lower, because I think you're going to pretty consistently see the Ohio States, the Georgias of the world get in there. But I think coming into this year, I think there is a bigger conversation at 1 than we've had in some time. And I think
like, more teams involved in that conversation than ever before.
Yes.
Yeah, I totally agree with you.
I mean,
totally agree.
we ran through our top 25 earlier this offseason, and I can make an argument for like 7 teams to be in that conversation. I think it's probably a little bit smaller, but
sorry, if I said Clemson was number 1, I don't think you would call me crazy.
No, I don't. And in fact, I think that is something we'll have to talk about this offseason. So
this is where we tease you all with what we think might be. I mean, look, Oregon, Ohio State, Georgia, Texas, Penn State. All right, maybe Michigan, maybe Clemson, Alabama. Like we could, there's probably 8 or 9 or 10 teams that could be in this conversation. Now, I think that's great for the game. I think that's a really good thing. Now, couple of things I want. One about the game, and then one about our rankings. Just like forces at play here. And Kirby said this a long time ago about the depth of the roster being the thing that's been like quarterbacks is the number one thing we all point to from the portal, changing the dynamics of the sport, because it's easy to look at. We know how good a quarterback can be, and then he goes somewhere else and it's an immediate fix, a backup, whatever. But I think the thing that it's harder to quantify on any given year in the preseason is the effect of depth. And even when we looked at the Final Four teams last year, all those teams, Penn State, Notre Dame, Ohio State, Texas, they all lost like 20-plus players in the portal. Now, they all gained high-end talent, like 7, 8, 9, 10 guys, a few of them 5 stars or whatever. But they were still like a net minus 10, minus 12, minus 15, give or take, total roster, which means the churn in the bottom 40 of your scholarships is going to be really hard to pinpoint and really hard to predict, which I think is, again, good for the sport that you don't have, Tom Osborne of the 70s or the 80s or 90s, like, 300 guys on the roster the way, it was 100 in the 2000s with Nick Saban. So I think that's a major market force that I think is really interesting to keep an eye on, that makes this whole thing super fun and interesting to me. The other element is how high up do you then swing on the teams you're taking a chance on? Because you said Indiana, we weren't as high as we should have been. Iowa State weren't as high as we should have been. But we also missed on a bunch of teams as well. I keep thinking of like South Carolina this year, right? South Carolina's one that I think, Kansas State's one that I'm already very high on, right? There's teams that I'm already seeing that weren't elite last year, but are clearly growing with a trajectory that's very positive. How much stock are you putting in that? And that's like, do we push them all the way up to like 4, 5, 6, 7? Or do we keep them in that, or do we play it safe and we put them like 13, 14, 15, just outside of the playoffs? Like it's going to be hard to pinpoint just how much stock you're putting in a team that is moving up and down the rankings.
Let's talk about South Carolina, because I think they're an interesting debate here. So they've got a top 10 quarterback in college football in Lenore Sellers. I think there's also a track record under Shane Beamer that they are a better team in November than they are in September. And so that makes them dangerous next year, because they get Alabama, Ole Miss, Texas A&M, and Clemson in the second half of their schedule. They also lose,
Woof.
3 interior offensive linemen. They also lose, I think, their top 5 tacklers, including and outside of that, like Kyle Kennard. They lose a couple of their top defensive tackles. So they have some questions. The biggest factor is going to be how good is Lenore Sellers at overcoming some of those issues, because their early season schedule, Virginia Tech, South Carolina State, Vanderbilt, Missouri, Kentucky, they could probably manage that. But they better find the other pieces for the second half. So that's kind of what the thing I'm wrestling with is growth for Sellers versus overcoming some of these line of scrimmage issues, which are going to be magnified in the SEC.
I think for the big teams, the teams that have, and by big, I mean like the teams that recruit in the top 5, the Ohio States of the world, right, and the Georgias of the world, I think those are the teams that are okay with the tough early schedule, because they can afford the loss and they can probably go 10-2, as we've just learned, and make the playoff. I think for a team like South Carolina that's trying to elevate itself, or like Arizona State last year, Indiana last year, I think Kansas State's one this year to watch. Iowa State last year, kind of going back to the same teams here. Florida's another one to keep an eye on, although they're not getting any benefits on their schedule. I think it's the team that has not yet proven it. South Carolina is sort of the avatar for this offseason, that you want to find the good schedule, meaning easier, manageable, handle it early, tougher games late. Ole Miss built this stuff up 2 years ago like this. Missouri 2 years ago built itself on that schedule. It's, Penn State. The reason we liked Penn State last year was their schedule was kind of a two-horse race. So I think it's the teams that haven't yet done it yet, that don't recruit in the top 5, that you probably want to be more aware of the schedule. Where you're talking like Georgia, Alabama, Texas, Penn State this year, it's like if you're great and you're a champion and you believe in that team, you got to just almost ignore the schedule and say you're going to get to 10, 11 wins, and that gets you into the championship game and gets you into the playoff?
I think the lesson, and obviously we'll see if it holds up, but the two biggest surprises last year in the playoff, SMU and Indiana.
I haven't mentioned SMU one time. I should have done that.
This is not a knock on either one. They were obviously, but good quarterback play and favorable schedules, and also I would say a fairly experienced roster across the board translated into the bump that got them into the playoff. But also I think there is a storyline here among top teams, which is it does seem like the portal takes away depth from the top teams, and
Yep.
you see the middle class getting stronger, which probably leads to a little bit more parity week to week and from season to season. And that's something we'll have to see if that continues. But that's my early read on things, is that it feels like the middle class of these conferences are getting stronger.
Current rankings: Ohio State 1, Texas 2, Georgia 3, Penn State 4, Notre Dame 5, Oregon 6, Clemson 7. That is largely just a replication of last year in some form or fashion. Like, those are basically the top 7 to 10 teams last year, with mix in Indiana, mix in Tennessee, mix in SMU, mix in Boise State. Miami at 8.
But would you disagree with any of those teams?
Yes.
At the top, though?
I don't know which ones, but yes.
Right. But not about the order. I'm just saying that, yeah, it is last year, but I mean, I don't feel like really that seems right to me.
But so here's my take on this. This goes back to the 6 out of 12 are just going to be wrong. I guarantee you 3 of those teams are probably down in the 8, 9, 10 range, or even lower. I just can't. I can't tell you which ones they are. Now, odds are, I believe in certain things. Like, I believe in Ryan Day, Kirby Smart, and Dan Lanning. I think Texas and Penn State might be the best situations right now. And I think Penn State's very hungry and willing to spend lots of money on this. So I think Penn State and Texas are my top 2, which again, I think is already turning the rankings a little bit from last year.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Because neither of those 2 teams would have been considered 2 of the best 2 teams in the country last year. Close, but not there. So, for example, you got Miami at 8, LSU 9, Alabama 10, Tennessee 11, South Carolina 12, Arizona State 13, Florida 14. So Florida would be a team that's trajectory's way up. South Carolina, trajectory way up. I would say LSU, trajectory up. Miami was pretty close to being very good last year, but because they're losing everything off that offense from a production standpoint, running back, tight end, receiver, quarterback, like all of it's gone. I don't know what to make of Miami yet, because I'm not fully bought in on Carson Beck, and I definitely am not buying Mario Cristobal. So I don't know where I'm at on Miami. I like LSU a lot.
Same here.
But LSU's not like us. They're a blue blood that recruits top 10 classes, so they're tougher to understand. The ones that I am really interested in this conversation from like a rising into the next tier: Kansas State, because they didn't do it last year, and I really like their pieces this year. SMU, Indiana, BYU are in this top 20. They already did it. I don't know about Ole Miss. How about Texas A&M? A&M is a team that hasn't done it yet. I don't know what to make of Illinois either. Michigan's weird. Michigan's weird because they won the national championship, but then they clearly weren't good enough last year to be in this conversation. But I think this year they could be special. So I don't know. I didn't mean to cut you off.
I was going to say Illinois. We haven't talked probably enough about Illinois this offseason. They bring back a ton. Also, their schedule is pretty manageable. They have to play at Indiana. They host USC. They host Ohio State. They do play at Washington and at Wisconsin. Those are tricky, but that's also pretty manageable. I mean, if you bring back a quarterback and Luke Altmaier, who's going to be one of the better ones in the Big Ten, and you've got good offensive line experience across the board, you just won 10 games. I mean, to me, it's not the significant jump that Indiana made, but if we're looking at a team that could go from 10-3 to just 10-2 in the regular season, or 11-1 with a loss to Ohio State. I mean, Illinois sounds like it's a pretty opportunistic chance there.
I love 26 through 30 on your list, and I think we did this when we talked about the top 25 a couple of weeks ago or a couple of months ago. Louisville, Nebraska, Texas Tech, Baylor, Auburn. I think all 5 of those teams are going to be improved. Rank them, and I don't mean like just go 26 through 30 like you've got them. I mean, like, let's say if I told you 2 of those 5 make the playoff, would you be shocked?
Probably.
Okay. If I told
One.
you one
One.
makes the playoff,
Yeah,
I feel comfortable that somebody ranked between 20 and 30 is going to make the playoff, if not
I
more than one.
I could buy it for two reasons. One, I think Missouri has a very favorable path to double-digit wins again. I don't know if they'll do it,
I don't think
but
they're good
this
enough.
they
I don't think they're good enough.
they fit the we're looking for a team with a favorable schedule.
All
Missouri's
right.
got it to make a run at the playoff.
Okay, just forget. I know I told you we have to pay attention to schedule, but of those five, Louisville, Nebraska, Texas Tech, Baylor, Auburn, they're all outside of your top 25 currently. Which one would you pick to make the playoff right now?
I'm going to give you a bad answer, but this also goes at something else. I think insert champion of the Big 12 here
That's
because
what I was going to say.
I was going to say I would just make a it's maybe like a little bit of a hot take, and I don't know if it is. I would be very surprised if we have one Big 12 team win multiple Big 12 championships like over the next 4 years. I would not be
It's great.
surprised if it's 4 different teams in 4 different years. They just is Arizona State's going to be the preseason favorite, and that makes total sense. But this is to get at what we were talking about earlier with being aggressive or different. It's almost given the cluster that this conference is going to be week in and week out. It's almost I am inclined to just pick someone different, and I hate to do that almost because the margins in this conference are so small that Arizona State's going to have to run the table perfectly, and you're going to have Kansas State getting better, BYU, Iowa State, Texas Tech, Utah, Baylor. I mean,
Well, and I sort of made you do it too. Like I'm not suggesting that this is your pick to win the Big 12. But if you're looking at those teams and you're going to go, which ones have the most dependable and successful quarterbacks? It's probably Texas Tech and Baylor.
mhm.
Which ones have invested lots of money on their rosters, just as much as everybody else? It's Texas Tech and Baylor. Auburn's not quite there yet with Jackson Arnold. Not really sure. Not quite there yet with Miller Moss and Louisville. I do think Nebraska could be really good, but it might be just a touch premature. They're like this year's South Carolina from last year. And I think, but if you told me Texas Tech or Baylor or both are playing in the Big 12 championship game, I'd be like, yep, no problem with that.
I think there's probably a little bit of urgency at Texas Tech to get to the Big 12 championship game, knowing that you've invested all this money, you've got all these facilities, the opportunity is there. You just saw what Arizona State did last year. I do think Nebraska.
They're this year's Ole Miss, by the way. Texas Tech is this year's Ole Miss.
Yeah, that's a good example. Very heavy in the portal, quarterback that's been there a couple years. Obviously, Baron Morton's on the transfer.
Putting all the chips in the table, though.
Yeah, all in. On Nebraska, home games against Michigan, USC, and Iowa. Toughest road game at Penn State. That's pretty manageable. You get Michigan early in the season, I would assume too, so that way, that gets the you're catching Michigan potentially with the Bryce Underwood on September 20th. He's still developed. So a quarterback that has a much more competent offensive coordinator and Dana Holgerson with a favorable schedule. Yeah, I could see it.
Who are the top 4 teams in college football in your mind in 2025? Sure to be allowed to be changed.
I would go with some combination of Texas, Georgia, Ohio State, and Penn State right now, with Notre Dame and Clemson just on the outside.
I kind of agree with those 4. I believe in Oregon, I think, more than the other ones for some reason.
Oregon, I think, has potentially their upside is there because they've recruited very well.
What if I said Texas, Penn State, Oregon, and Clemson and left Ohio State and Georgia out of it?
That's not like ultra crazy.
I like Georgia a little bit more because a little bit more stability at quarterback. I think the vengeance thing is a big deal. I think it mattered to Ohio State this year. It mattered.
I mean, Kirby's already on a tear. The guys can't practice. They can't practice for the he's already on them.
Yeah, the Kobe Dean's going to come out and say, well, they're going to pick us to be 7-5 next. Coming out. Right. I can't believe the experts think we're going to be 7-5. Mr. Dean, what are you talking about?
I think that was a little manufactured propaganda there.
Yeah. I'm not the ones I am not. I think Notre Dame and Miami are the 2 that I'm kind of down on. But Notre Dame's got such good talent. They're young. I believe in Freeman. Like I don't know.
Offensive line's going to be pretty good there.
I know.
I know you like good offensive lines. So
I do. I love lots of big old meaty men, you know? All right, we're done. That was your little taste of some rankings conversations that we're about to have over the course of the next 7 or 8 weeks. I find some of the strategy and philosophy around our preseason rankings to be changing so fast that I just wanted to chat about it a little bit, you know? We'll have more of these conversations as we get deeper into our rankings.
100%. I mean, the process is just starting. I mean, I can tell you, I've been working on this since December. We've got a long ways to go. We have a lot of ground to make up in the month of April, and so it's going to change. But also, I think let's keep an eye on that second portal window too. Let's see what happens in April 16th to the 25th, and how that could impact some of these teams as well.
Heisman watch last year in the magazine, Tier 1. Miller Moss, ooh. Shador Sanders, okay. Nico, ooh. Dylan Gabriel, yes. Jackson Dart, okay. Jalen Milroe, fine. Carson Beck, okay. Quinn Ewers, ooh. Travis Hunter's on here, down on the bottom. He's on the list though. He's on the top tier. Hot seat. I'm looking at the magazine from last year, by the way. Dave Aranda, hot seat. Sam Pittman, hot seat. Billy Napier, hot seat. Extension.
Yeah, stay of execution, right?
No, there's a bunch of other guys that got fired on that list. I was just glancing at the magazine here, so I'm looking at it.
Also, we did get Stan Drayton, Will Hall, Mike New.
No, I know.
Not bad, you know.
Honestly, our first team All-Americans, Tyler Booker, Donovan Jackson, Tate Ratledge, Kelvin Banks, Will Campbell, Colston Loveland, Emeka Ibuka, Luther Burden, Tet McMillan, Travis Hunter, Travion Henderson, Ollie Gordon, Carson Beck. Almost everyone draft eligible that's going to the draft is going to be a first-round pick on that list, with the exception of Ratledge because he got hurt, I guess. But Tet McMillan, Burden, Ekbuka, Loveland, Campbell, Banks, probably Booker. I don't think Donovan Jackson makes the first round, but I think Booker does. Hunter will be there. Henderson will be maybe the top running back taken in the draft. So that's pretty good there.
Over Genty, you think?
Oh, wait a second. Yeah, sorry. No, Genty's so high up the list that I forget
okay.
Him.
Yeah, I was like, wait a minute. Like, did I miss something?
All right, sorry.
Yeah, Genty and Amarion Hampton have been getting the most love, but
Caleb Johnson's going to get picked pretty highly as well. So
yeah,
I think I like Henderson middle second round as like the second best running back probably.
Also, the name that you mentioned in there, Ollie Gordon. I mean, Oklahoma State's just absolute collapse last year. He only ran for over 800 yards. I'll be curious to see if he rebounds in the NFL.
I would love the Titans to take him in like the 4th round. So I think 235 pounds between the tackles. Let's go. I do want Damian Martinez. I like him a lot.
Yeah.
All right. Okay. That does it for us. Rate, review, subscribe on the podcast app of choice. Follow us on the socials. Make sure you check out the website, athlonsports.com. And of course, stay tuned for all those magazines that are hitting newsstands now. You can order them on the website as well. And there you go. You can see it on YouTube. Thumbs up on the YouTube page. Notifications turned on. Turn that little bell on there and come hang out when the show drops on the YouTube page. Check that out. For Steven, I'm Braden. Thanks for hanging out. We'll talk to you next time.